kind of a quick kind of assessment is, do they tend to kind of watch and listen before they join in? So that in school you might have at PE, or even like in a large group activity, you might see somebody that tends to stand back and kind of what we think of as shy away from joining in right away. But partly what they're trying to do is kind of understand what the process is that's going on before they begin to go and act. Even if it's very physical, extroverts are out to do it, and let's do it, and let's see what fun this can be, and what are we going to gain from it. Where the introverted child might feel more compelled to say, I want to watch first. I want to see if I can understand what's going on. When there is a subject of interest for them, they tend to kind of almost know way more than what ordinarily people would even think about being interested in, and they can concentrate more intently on it. So they'll know maybe a whole lot about the Civil War or certain aspects of it, or they may know a whole lot about a certain hobby and can talk about it what feels like for hours, simply because they have an interest in it, and they can lose themselves in it, and it becomes almost an internal part of their own lives, rather than, oh, that was kind of fun to do, but I don't know if I'd play that again. I'll go do something else. Do they enjoy their time alone in their room, and are they kind of energized by having an opportunity to be introspective versus being out? So that, again, it's not a matter of simply saying, Billy spends all his time in his room and he never comes out, and I don't know what's going on with him, versus Billy spends some time in his room, and when he comes out, he's more engaged, he's more willing to talk to people, he's more interested in what's going on, but he needs an opportunity to kind of pull back and understand that relationship rather than simply jumping in full bore as a more extroverted child might. Do the kids need a space for themselves, a place where they can find some kind of quiet, because it is such an internal process, to be able to think about and kind of distill the information that they've had, rather than just keep going from one activity to another? Do they get uncomfortable if people are too close? And it's not simply a question, again, of I don't like being crowded, as it's draining for someone that has a more introverted kind of personality style to be around a lot of people, because it kind of pulls for them, because it's a demand on their own attention. And that it can be very, very difficult if you interrupt them, partly because they're so internal, so that interrupting or kind of not going in without knocking on the door might kind of throw them off track, and as a result kind of tend to aggravate, and then they have to feel like they have to regroup once again. Introverted kids might many times not be as certain of what they do know, and so they might seek a lot of validation from other people around the idea of, I'm not sure that what I understand is what might truly be what you're trying to tell me, or if I understand it sometimes differently than how other people might understand it. It may make it difficult for the introverted child to feel like maybe what I have to say isn't as valid as what the more outgoing kids tend to do as a result. The introverted child can need some private time, and you have to kind of be willing to think about building that into their daily schedule, and not keeping them overly busy, simply because without that time to kind of regroup and think, they can oftentimes feel like they're going off the deep end with no opportunity to think about or reflect about their days. And it can often put them in what can appear as a very bad mood, simply because they haven't had time to kind of reflect and think about what it is that's going on with them. And the introverted child might need some help learning when it is they need to take a break. So kids can learn that when they are in a what feels like a bad mood, or feeling overwhelmed by either school or demands in their lives, that it's a time to maybe say, if you pull back a bit and think about it, you'll have an opportunity to kind of reflect and then make some sense of it, versus feeling like you have to plow ahead. And the introverted child could be a whole lot more insightful if they're asked what they need, and if they're confident that their need is going to be okay. Many times they're not sure what their experience is like, if it's valid or not. And so, as I mentioned, helping somebody asking again their opinion or their thoughts about something can be a way of pulling for that introverted child to be a little bit more open and be a bit more engaged with what's going on as a whole. Particularly in families, it's important to understand when they're siblings, just like that there may be a real difference. Not everybody in the family, just like in my own, is going to be maybe just extroverted or introverted. And that the tendency is that many times, because the more outgoing kid gets much more of the attention from the point of view of they're doing so much more compared to the more introverted kid, that the introverted kid sometimes can tend to go with the flow and go along with what's going on, but really not be that interested in it. Or they may be the one that won't speak up as much or as quickly, simply because their process involves more thoughtfulness than the more extroverted sibling might. So that if you're working particularly in families, you have to kind of look at, in the dynamics of the family, who might be the quieter of the kids, but might have some insight into what really is going on. Now, unfortunately, sometimes it's the extroverted kid that kind of gets pinpointed to say they're the one that's the trouble, because they're the more outgoing of the bunch. When it could be that it's not that at all, it may be some other dynamics. But finding out, particularly from the sibling that might be quieter, they may have a better reading on what's going on in this family altogether. When you're working with kids in particular around socializing or being in social settings, sometimes it can be quite challenging for that child to say that there again is that need or that desire to be connected with other people, but I'm often faced, particularly like through middle school and high school, I'm put into situations where the challenge is going to be that it's going to be in a large setting, that it's going to be at a football game or at a dance or at a social, or even if it's in a smaller group of peers, it's still going to be very, very awkward for me to kind of feel like I can be in there and not feel that almost immediate need to kind of flee. And it's not flee from relationships as it's very, very draining, not only physically, but sometimes emotionally, for that person to be around that large of a group of people. So that you can kind of work with some strategies that can be of help to kids when you're thinking about kind of planning with them about being social. So the first one is the one, it was my favorite. It's the sea anemone, which was my favorite because that's what I did. I would just kind of plant myself someplace. So if you kind of think in the ocean, an anemone just kind of latches onto a rock and is anchored there, and it just kind of sends out those little furry-looking feelers, but it can pull back when it wants to, and then it can kind of put the feelers up, but it didn't have to move around a whole lot. And so that you can kind of work with kids to say, if you can put yourself in a spot, maybe not right in the center of activity, but close to it in proximity, people are going to come by, and you have an opportunity to interact with them as you can kind of tolerate. And then when you don't need to, you can just kind of pull back and be more reserved. And if you have to, you can get up and move away and come back and latch onto that rock a little bit later. The as if actually is kind of what when we first started talking about actors, that you can put on a bit of a role. You can try out a new skill in a way that says it doesn't have to reveal a whole lot of what you might feel like is you personally, as it is, I can be outgoing, I can be friendly, I can be engaging, without having to kind of feel like I'm bearing my soul to everybody that's there. And so that sometimes actors can do just that. Steve Martin was great at that. He can get up and play the banjo and act really, really goofy, but he's a really, really private person. But he can do that with ease because I can project that out there for the time that it takes, and then I can kind of pull back and not have to do that. And one of the things that he often would struggle with is he'd meet people in public and they said, well, say something funny. And he's like, I don't have anything funny to say. It's like, yeah, like that act you do. He said, well, it's an act. I put that out there when I'm performing, but it's not who I am. So that sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle for kids to say, try a new skill of engaging with other people, interacting with other people, even if that's not who you always are. And then you can kind of pull back and say, I can reflect about that, which can give you an opportunity to try again later on down the road. Prop job is a neat way to kind of say it takes the focus off of them and has something to use. So pets are great props. Everybody can pay attention to the cute cat or dog or whatever, and puts less pressure on you to kind of perform or engage with other people because their attention is on that animal. Or if you're at a party, you may not want to take a pet to a party, but you can take a camera. You can be the person that's going to take pictures, and everybody's willing to kind of engage and say, take a picture of me, or you can kind of inject yourself into situations by saying, can I take a picture of you? And so it's a safer way because everybody's focused on the object versus who you might be. Now, if they want to take your picture, then you might have to struggle with that a bit, but you can smile, kind of, which leads us to the second one, a friendly face. The idea behind using that is it's a practice, again, that for so many people that are more introverted, there's this kind of flat or kind of calm exterior that it's kind of hard to read. And some people kind of like, I'm not quite sure what to make of them. So it's hard to kind of engage whether or not to approach them or not. But you don't want to encourage kind of this fake Cheshire cat smile because it's like, who wants to get near that? But you can work at learning to have kids practice making eye contact with somebody, even if it's only briefly, as a way to say, I'm interested in you, or I want to engage with you, or I'm connecting with you. And even to put on more of a kind of a softer smile, kind of like a Mona Lisa smile. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a friendly person. I can approach them. They don't have any fangs bared or, teeth showing. So that there's a way to kind of help them practice that. Small talk. And there's really, for most introverted people, I think small talk is probably one of the single biggest challenges, and I think particularly for kids, the idea of saying, I'm talking about stuff that it's like, why? Why would I do that? I have no interest in that subject. Why would I talk to them about that? And it's helpful for them to understand it's a way of connecting with people, and it's what extroverts do. They talk all the time, and they can talk about anything all the time, and with no thought whatsoever. Helping them understand that there's a way to kind of open, kind of like to greet somebody and to say, oh, I noticed this, or to listen to somebody else's conversation and chime in, is a way to kind of get introduced into a situation. Fail-safe has to do with if things really, particularly for kids, get to be really, really overwhelming in social settings, that they have a kind of a backup plan that says, I can move away. I can go outside if it's a party. I can go take a break. I can find one other person and say, will you walk with me over here? I can go to the punch bowl. I can do something that gets me away, even momentarily, just to gather my thoughts, to take a deep breath, and to kind of re-energize before I go back into that fray. It requires a little bit of forethought. It requires a little bit of planning to say, so when you're there, how are you going to manage that? What's your plan for kind of an exit strategy if you need to? And if you don't want to leave the party, if you don't want to leave the gathering, particularly if you've only been there for 5 minutes, how can you go and take a break and then re-engage and practice that, okay? The last one, Groundhog Day, has to do more with the notion that for many introverts, because they spend so much time in their head, they can oftentimes be very, very self-critical and kind of beat themselves up. And because they don't often rely on other people for feedback about how they do, they're oftentimes their own worst critic. So they can revisit failure after failure after failure over and over again, kind of like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. So the idea is you want to help them kind of be aware that that's a pattern for them and learn to kind of interrupt that set of thinking and say, you know what, that may not have been such a good situation, but I've had other situations that I've handled okay before that, and I'm going to have some opportunities in the future to practice it again. and I can maybe be more successful the next time. It's amazing how often, for somebody that does not engage more actively outward with a lot of people, how self-critical and beat up introverts can be. And it's almost like it's a way of kind of keeping you from maybe making the effort to re-engage in situations with other people, simply because you think you're not going to be successful at it, when you can actually be quite successful. Some things that are important for particularly teachers or people in school settings to know about kids and how to work with the more introverted kids. They do need and they do like quiet in order to be able to concentrate. And I know that particularly in classrooms, that may be one of the most challenging things that you have to provide, is some places where kids can be quiet and have an opportunity to kind of think. And if they can't always do it in the classroom setting, if there's a way maybe in the library, or to map out and understand that at home they have a place where they can be quiet, so they're maybe not doing their homework at the kitchen table where, brother and sister are trying to do their homework, that there's a place where they can go and just think about things and kind of put all their attention to it, because that way they have a chance to kind of mull stuff over. They'll need some extra time to communicate, so that if you're firing off questions to people and you come to Tommy and Tommy just kind of freezes, it may not be because he doesn't know the material, as he's trying to pull back from that kind of long string pathway information that he might want to give you, but it might take him a little bit longer. But he may also have some insights into stuff that nobody else had even thought about. And so you have to give them a little extra time to think about it before. The other thing that's important with extroverts, if you can, is when you're talking with them, talk to them about one topic at a time. Don't try and talk about a number of different things and keep asking, because they need time to think about it. And if they have a lot of things they're trying to think of at once, they tend to just shut down, because they're trying to sort out which one of those is most important and which one they want to answer. So you might have to kind of pull for and kind of coax and encourage them to give their opinion. And even afterwards, go back and say, it looked like you were thinking about something, but you may not have been sure what it was that you wanted to say. Was there something that we missed? And they can come back. Even in the discussion, say the next day, to say, yesterday, remember we were talking about that? Has anybody thought any more about that? You might be surprised that if a child is more introverted, they might say, yeah, I thought about that. I thought that about, I almost stayed awake all night thinking about that, because there was something about that I wanted to say that I didn't say yesterday. They can kind of appear aloof, or you might think that they're really, really shy, when they really are just kind of inside. Introverts tend to distill and kind of boil down information all the time. So they're always in a process of kind of an internal dialogue with themselves about what's going on. They may like really difficult, complex problems to kind of work on, because they understand that it involves a lot of thought and a lot of intricacy and a lot of planning. And they do really well with detail. They'll come back. They'll be the person that has, on projects, all this additional kind of stuff that you kind of go, I wasn't even asking for that. They'll do it because that's where their thought processes tend to go. Maybe not the most favorite thing for teachers to always hear, but why do we have to do the thing that we're doing? I want to understand that. And it's not simply to be belligerent or kind of oppositional. The more I understand it, the more it makes sense to me, the more it has meaning for me, versus we're just doing this because we have to do it, and it's just like, that doesn't make sense. Can work alone by themselves quite happily, and don't need, and maybe even find it difficult to sit in a larger group project and work on it in a larger setting, particularly if they're having to offer something verbally in that setting. And so they don't often socialize as much, and you don't need to watch them or supervise them as clearly, because once they kind of get engrossed in something, they're kind of engrossed in it, and the trouble you might have is pulling them back to get them to focus on something else. So if you're trying to work with kids, or if you're involved in maybe in therapy with them or trying to get to know them a little bit better. Some ways that you can learn to kind of bridge the communication gaps is, like I mentioned, talk about one thing at a time. Keep and try to, until you feel like they've maybe exhausted that subject or they can't go on with that, then you can maybe move on to something else. But if you start talking about your problems in school, your problems with your family, your problems with relationships, it may be overwhelming for them and they can't sit and pull all that information out at once. Ask, then listen. So you don't want to kind of try and interrupt or mid-sentence say, I want to ask a question. Let them finish what they're saying so that, one, they can get everything out. But secondly, for an introvert, when it gets interrupted, it's almost like they have to then restart that whole process again and pull it all back up. And it's more challenging for them. And so as a result, they sometimes say, I forget it. Don't finish their sentences for them. And if you can, ask them or help them to write it down. Even if you want to say, between now and the next time we meet, I'd like you to write some of what you're thinking about. As a result, because it helps with prompts, so that even if they're only writing a word or two, when they come back to think about it, that prompt actually activates that pathway quicker for them, and they can pull that stuff from long-term memory faster because they have little bullets that they can use to kind of process information. Whatever involvement you guys have with kids that tend to be more on the introverted spectrum, is that they bring a lot to the table. Their ability to kind of concentrate, the fact that they can remain quite loyal, and friendships and relationships matter a great deal to them, even if they're only a few. Their thoughtfulness, the way they think about and chew on material and then come back and reflect on it, can be a huge help, not only in classroom, but if you're working with families or in therapy with them. And they're willing to be persistent and to consider, they have a huge range of knowledge many times that they don't often always know they possess. And so that it's important to kind of keep picking away with kids that are introverted to kind of see if you can pull for or access all the information that they may have. Introverts can really make really tough decisions. And it's important that it's not about social skills. It's not teaching them always. Those helpful tips about like kind of starting conversations are helpful for introverts, but it's not because they don't want to be around people. And it's not because they're lacking some ability to engage with people. It's simply how they tend to kind of approach relationships is different than it is with the more outgoing, more extroverted people. And so it's not a matter of, I have to teach this kid social skills because he doesn't know what to do, or he's not aware of his impact of how he behaves on other people. Introverts are painfully sometimes aware of how their impact. And so they sometimes tend to hold back on that because they don't want to, in their minds, inflict any kind of pain or discomfort to someone. The fact that they can work well on their own without a whole lot of supervision, and if they do have a question about guidance, it's going to be a well thought out question. So it's not simply, well, what do I do next? It's why would we take this step next? And I was thinking we could do this afterwards. And they really do seek and look for cooperation rather than for conflict.